to this edition of San Diego People. I'm Sandra Moss. San Diego schools are facing steep budget cuts because of California's fiscal crisis. Hundreds of teachers will likely be laid off, and class sizes will grow, especially in the early grades. What impact will all of this have on schools that already were struggling to maintain student achievement levels? Today on San Diego People, we'll examine not only the budget problems, but also the opportunities to reform our schools. Joining me now is Nellie Meyer. She is Deputy Superintendent for Academics for the San Diego Unified School District. Welcome.
Thank you.
And your district is facing perhaps the biggest challenge in its history. Next week, your board will be deciding on layoffs. It's going to happen on Thursday.
Yes.
What kind of layoffs are we likely to see? How many teachers? How many other employees?
Well, we asked the schools to talk to us about what kind of support they would need, and we gave them an absolutely strongly reduced budget, as you mentioned. And we're looking at a recommendation of up to 900 teachers and up to 500 to 600 of other employees that support all of our students.
Devastating.
Devastating, absolutely.
And the impact of these cuts?
Well, we've done a very good job over the last 4 or 5 years of making sure that our cuts are as far away from the classroom, because we really recognize the importance of the teachers and that interaction that they have with the students each day. This year, it's much more difficult. We're cutting all sorts of departments that we had never cut before, really the places that we kept whole because they were so valuable, and we're looking at cuts within the classroom, which we hadn't experienced.
And let's talk about that, because the disparity between schools is tremendous, especially when you're talking about some of the lower income schools in some of our inner cities that have a lot of new teachers, and that's because these cuts are going to be based on seniority. How fair is that?
Well, I think anytime you have to have students lose a teacher at any campus, it has a great impact. And we do know that we have more transiency at our campuses that have the newer teachers. So it does have an impact that we see. Some of our schools have up to 20% of their staff who are brand new teachers, and they are the first due to the seniority system.
Well, is there any way to change that, to make it more fair for these schools that are already struggling?
Well, I believe that anytime any school will lose a teacher, that it would be tough. And as far as changing it, it really depends on that teacher's connection with the school. We talked about different strategies. We know in Los Angeles, they have looked at skipping according to certain criteria, but we haven't started those discussions.
What does that mean?
Well, they look and say, if you're at a school that is high poverty, we're going to skip you in the seniority ranks. Mm-hmm. So that has been one of the discussions that has occurred in other parts of the state.
The other challenge facing classrooms is size.
Yes.
And it's interesting because for years people have thought that size of the classroom really does matter. Yet the difference in class size from, say, the 60s, there are twice as many teachers per student in the United States now. And yet, the achievement levels of students has pretty much remained the same since then. So does size really matter in the classroom?
Well, I get asked that question a lot, and I have to say, having taught for many years, it absolutely does. Part of it is intuitive, but any time that you increase the number of people that you have as customers, or you have to ensure receive an education, as that ratio goes up, they're less likely to get that attention that they need in the classroom. And our teaching has changed since the 60s. So many of our teachers have hands-on experiments, and they're using technology in many different ways. And the management and the creation of those activities really is improved with a smaller class size.
So what kind of numbers are we talking when it comes to the classroom number of students?
Well, for example, one of the recommendations that we know is not something that would be strong for kindergartners is to increase the size of kindergarten to 29:1. And we know that kindergartners in the early years, especially those who have English as a second language, are benefited by smaller class sizes.
So right now it's 20:1, is it?
24:1.
Okay.
But we also have classes where we have impacted them with federal money to make it even smaller. So we have classes at 15:1 as well.
Mm-hmm. And now one lifeline that I know educators are holding on to is the action that Governor Brown is going to be taking in the coming months about extending some of the higher income sales tax, that sort of thing. How likely is it that voters will follow that?
Well, whether it's likely or not, it's absolutely needed. And we know right now that that initiative would bring $57 million back to our particular district. So we can see that it could help us in class size, as we mentioned. It could help promote programs like music programs and art programs that are desperately needed, that previously we have not had to recommend as a cut. The likelihood depends on the communication effort that would happen over the next several months. And we're hopeful. You know, we certainly can't bet on that happening, but we're very hopeful because we know our students need it.
There has been a lot of criticism about the teacher contracts, and not this September, but next September 2012 in the fall, the teachers will be getting, I believe, a 7% pay raise.
Correct.
And some would suggest that perhaps that contract should maybe be renegotiated to accommodate the students during these tough times.
Well, I know you're going to have the president of the teachers union here to speak to that question as well. I must say that our relationship with the teachers union has been a positive one, and that, you know, separate from negotiations, collaboration is occurring at many different levels, so we're very proud of that. It has not always been the case. I can also say that teachers have, and other employees, all of our bargaining groups have made concessions. They have agreed to furloughs in all of the different categories. So that has raised towards our deficit about $20 million, which is about the same as that 7% raise would be. But to your question about the contract, I know in 2013, 2014, at that time when we expect hopefully the budget to go back up, we know that we're also going to be looking at renegotiating the contract. And what that looks like is really kind of looking into a crystal ball at this point, but it's certainly something we're considering everything.
Now, you have been a teacher.
Yes.
You have been a principal.
Yes.
And now you are assistant superintendent.
Correct.
When you look at this large pie, and you've
Yes.
been looking at it since 1982?
Yes.
Okay, a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you sympathize with most? And who is the biggest villain?
Oh, good question. I always sympathize with those in the classroom, the students first. Students who may lose 6th grade camp and different opportunities that they might otherwise have had. And, you know, villains, it's a difficult question to point a finger at any one person. But part of what we need is better support from the state government in Sacramento to support and fund our schools to the level they're funded in other states. So while I know that they have different people pulling on them for that same pot of money, we're certainly underfunded at this point.
Well, we are facing some big challenges, and I do appreciate you coming on, and I know we'll be talking to you after next week again, perhaps, and good luck to you on that. When we come back on this edition of San Diego People, we're going to be talking more about how the Budget Acts will affect San Diego schools. Joining me next, an education reform advocate and the president of the San Diego Teachers Union. We'll be